Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're gonna step into a true crime mystery that's both fascinating and honestly really frustrating. The case of Dr. No. We've got a whole stack of articles, research case files, all dedicated to the suspected serial killer who operated mainly in Ohio between 1981 and 1990.
And what makes this case especially intriguing is that despite the nickname Dr. No, we still don't know who this person really was. It's like he just vanished.
Yeah, it really is, and that's part of what we're going to try to explore today. How a case with this many victims, this much attention, could still remain unsolved. We're talking at least 9 women and girls, many connected to truck stops and Interstate 71, all meeting really similar fates.
It's that connection to the trucking world that really sets this case apart. Imagine for a moment that vast network of highways, the
Hmm.
constant movement of people and goods all happening under the radar is both a blessing and a curse for investigators. Huge pool of potential suspects, but incredibly difficult to track.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack that's constantly on the move. So let's start at the beginning. The first victim was found in April of 1981 in Miami County, Ohio. What's striking is that she remained unidentified for 37 years, known only as Buckskin Girl because of the poncho she was wearing. And it wasn't until 2018, with advancements in DNA technology, that she was finally identified as Marcia King.
And that really speaks to the evolution of forensic science and how it's impacting cold cases, even decades later. Imagine the anguish of her family not knowing her fate for almost 4 decades. But it also highlights the dedication of investigators who just refuse to give up.
It's a powerful reminder that justice, or at least answers, can sometimes be a long time coming. Now, the next victim we need to talk about is Marcia Matthews. In 1985, she was found alive but badly beaten near the Union 76 truck stop in Austintown, Ohio, a location that's going to come up again and again. Sadly, she died from her injuries just a couple days later.
This is where that pattern starts to emerge. The connection to truck stops, the violence against women, and sadly a trail that often goes cold. It's almost like the killer knew how to exploit the transient nature of the trucking world to his advantage.
It's a chilling thought, but it's in 1986 that the name Dr. No enters the picture. This is where things get really interesting. The victim, Shirley Dean Taylor, was also last seen at that same Union 76 truck stop. She was a sex worker who had told people she was going to meet a regular client, a man she called Dr. No. The thing is, no one ever knew his real name, but the nickname stuck.
It's almost like he was branding himself, even if unintentionally. And it had a real impact. Think about the fear that nickname must have evoked, especially within the trucking community. It turned Dr. No into an almost mythical figure, a boogeyman lurking in the shadows.
That's a great point. It wasn't just a nickname, it was a symbol of terror. And unfortunately, the body count tragically starts to rise from this point on. Later that year, April Barnett, another sex worker connected to the Union 76, vanished. Her body was found miles away, and then Judith Ann Allen was found murdered in 1987 in another state entirely.
And this widening geographical scope really brings home the challenges investigators were facing. You've got truckers crossing state lines, disappearing into this vast network of highways. It's a jurisdictional nightmare trying to coordinate efforts and share information.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if those challenges contributed to the case going cold for so long. Now, another victim connected to the Union 76 was Anne Marie Patterson, who vanished in 1987. What's particularly intriguing about her case is that she had spoken to police just a week before disappearing about another murder suspect.
Right, and that raises so many questions. Was there a connection between those two cases? Was she targeted because she knew something? Unfortunately, those questions remain unanswered, but it definitely adds another layer of complexity to the investigation.
It really does, and this is where the sheer number of potential suspects becomes so overwhelming. We've got a lot more victims to discuss, and it seems like every time investigators get a lead, it turns into a dead end.
That's one of the most frustrating aspects of this case. There were so many potential suspects, many of them truckers, but nothing concrete ever connected them definitively to Dr. No. It's like chasing ghosts.
So where do we go from here? We've got this escalating body count, a chilling nickname, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. What else can you tell us about the investigation and the frustrating lack of a clear suspect?
The investigation was massive. Police interviewed hundreds of people, but it seemed like every time they got close, the trail would go cold. They even offered a $10,000 reward and plastered posters with a composite sketch of Dr. No across truck stops nationwide. But nothing panned out.
It's hard to believe that in this day and age, a case like this could remain unsolved.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the Dr. No case is a stark reminder that even with advances in forensics and technology, some mysteries persist. And as we delve deeper into the case, you'll see just how tangled the web of evidence, suspects, and dead ends becomes.
Well, I'm definitely hooked. Let's take a closer look at some of the key suspects who emerged during the investigation and see if we can unravel this tangled web a bit more.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've established that the investigation into Dr. No was massive and frustrating, with a lot of potential suspects but no smoking gun. Let's talk about some of those suspects. Who stood out to investigators as particularly strong leads?
One that really caught their attention was Alvin Wilson. He was a truck driver who emerged as a person of interest in 1991, and for a while it seemed like they might finally have their man.
Okay, so what made Alvin Wilson such a strong lead?
Well, his hair samples matched some that were found on a few of the victims, and there was evidence like credit card receipts that placed him in the vicinity of some of the Ohio murders.
But you said for a while it seemed like they had their man. That suggests things didn't quite pan out as they hoped. What happened?
You're right. The investigation into Wilson revealed that he had a history of violence against women. In 1990, he was arrested for assaulting and attempting to murder a woman. And after his arrest, another woman came forward claiming he had tried to strangle her back in 1986.
Wow, that's incredibly disturbing. And it does sound eerily similar to the Dr. No MO. So investigators must have been pretty hopeful when they ran his DNA against the evidence they had.
Yes, but unfortunately, the results came back inconclusive. They couldn't definitively link him to any of the Dr. No victims, despite those similarities in his behavior and the geographical overlap.
It's almost like they were so close to cracking the case, only to be met with another dead end. It must have been incredibly disheartening for everyone involved.
It was a major setback. But the investigation continued. Two other truckers also came up as potential suspects. John Fortenberry and James Robert Cruz Jr. both were convicted of murders, but again, their MOs and victim profiles didn't quite align with the Dr. No cases.
It's interesting that so many of the potential suspects were truck drivers. It really emphasizes how the nature of that profession, the constant travel and the anonymity, could make it easier for someone to evade detection.
Exactly. And that's what made this case so challenging. These weren't just local crimes. They spanned multiple states, which added layers of jurisdictional complexity to the investigation.
It sounds like investigators were dealing with a perfect storm of challenges. A mobile killer, a vast geographical area, and the inherent difficulties of tracking people in a pre-internet, pre-cell phone era. It's amazing that they were able to connect any of the dots at all.
It is a testament to their persistence and dedication. But despite their best efforts, the mystery of Dr. No persisted. Even as technology advanced, the DNA evidence they had collected from the crime scenes remained a puzzle, sometimes suggesting a single perpetrator, sometimes hinting at multiple individuals.
That's incredible. So even with advancements in DNA analysis, those early mixed results continued to cast a shadow of doubt over the investigation. I imagine that must have made it even more frustrating for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And to add to the frustration, the leads kept coming, but they never quite led to a definitive answer. In 1995, another truck driver named Sean Patrick Goebel came under suspicion. He was arrested for killing two prostitutes in Tennessee and suspected of involvement in other murders across multiple states.
Given his history and the widespread nature of his crimes, he must have seemed like a really strong contender for the Dr. No title.
He did, and investigators really dug into his background. But as they pieced together his timeline, they discovered he couldn't have been responsible for the earlier Dr. No murders. He was still in high school when those first murders happened, and later when many of the other victims were killed, he was serving in the Army and stationed outside of Ohio.
So another dead end, despite the initial promise. It seems like investigators kept encountering these tantalizing leads that ultimately led nowhere. Did anything change as we entered the new millennium? Did technology or new evidence provide any breakthroughs?
Well, the Dr. No case never really went away. It remained open, and every so often something would happen that would bring it back into the spotlight.
I have a feeling you're about to tell me about one of those moments. What happened?
In 2005, a truck driver named Delmas Colvin was arrested in Toledo for the murders of 5 prostitutes. He later admitted to killing at least 2 more in New Jersey, and he was caught thanks to advances in DNA profiling.
Okay, that's significant. So was his DNA a match for any of the Dr. No victims? Did they finally get their answer after all these years?
Well, here's the thing. Colvin denied any involvement in the Dr. No murders.
Wait, what? He confessed to multiple murders but drew the line at Dr. No? That seems strange. Why would he do that?
It's hard to say for sure. Perhaps he wanted to be known for his own crimes to have a separate legacy, Or maybe he genuinely believed he wasn't involved.
That's fascinating and incredibly frustrating. So, even with the advancements in DNA technology, the mystery of Dr. No remained elusive. It's like he was a phantom, always just out of reach.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a feeling that has lingered. Despite catching other killers, the Dr. No case is still open today. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we're going to shift gears a bit and explore the impact of this case. Not just on the investigation itself, but on the victims, their families, and the communities that were left grappling with fear and uncertainty.
That's an important perspective. We've talked a lot about the investigative side of things, but it's crucial to remember that behind every case file, behind every news headline, there are real people whose lives were forever altered by these events.
Absolutely. And as we delve into that human element, we'll also explore the broader themes of justice and memory. What does justice look like when the perpetrator remains unknown? How do we honor the victims and ensure their stories aren't forgotten even as the years pass?
Those are profound questions, and I'm eager to explore them further. Let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed so far, and then dive into that final chapter of our exploration of the Dr. No case. We've spent a lot of time, talking about the investigation, the suspects, the dead ends. But as we wrap up this deep dive into the Dr. No case, I think it's important to kind of shift our focus to the human side of this story. These weren't just names on a case file. These were real women with lives, families, dreams. What can you tell us about them?
You're absolutely right. It's so easy to get caught up in those procedural aspects, the twists and turns, that we sometimes forget about the very real human cost of these crimes. Take Marcia King, for example, the Buckskin girl. Imagine the pain her family endured not knowing her fate for 37 years. That's almost a lifetime of uncertainty and grief.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And what about Shirley Dean Taylor, the woman who unwittingly gave the killer his chilling moniker? It makes you wonder if he ever grasped the weight that that nickname would carry, the fear it would evoke, how it would become synonymous with terror.
It's a question we may never have the answer to, but it speaks to the unintentional consequences of our actions. How a simple phrase can take on a life of its own and become a symbol for something far darker.
And we can't forget the victims who were never identified, those whose stories remain incomplete. It's a tragedy within a tragedy to be erased not only from life but also from memory.
Yes, but thankfully in recent years, advances in DNA technology and genealogy have given some of those unidentified victims their names back. Paula Beverly Davis identified in 2010, and Patrice Anita Corley identified in 2017. It's a testament to the dedication of those who work tirelessly to bring closure to these cold cases, to give a voice to the voiceless.
It's a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, there are people fighting for justice and recognition. But beyond the individual tragedies, the Dr. No case had a much broader impact, didn't it? It cast a long shadow of fear, especially for women, particularly those who worked around truck stops or traveled alone on those highways.
Absolutely. This case tapped into a very primal fear, the fear of the unknown, of being vulnerable, of being targeted simply for existing in certain spaces. And it's a fear that's still relevant today, unfortunately.
That's a powerful point. It reminds us that while the Dr. No case happened decades ago, the issues it raises, the anxieties that it exposes, are still very much with us.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And this case also forced law enforcement to reevaluate how they approached crimes against women, especially those involved in sex work. There was a recognition that these cases were often marginalized, not given the same level of attention or resources.
It's a stark reminder that sometimes it takes a tragedy of this magnitude to spark meaningful change, to challenge systemic biases and force a reckoning.
Yes, and the Dr. No case, despite remaining unsolved, did lead to some positive changes in how these types of crimes are investigated, how evidence is collected and analyzed, and how victims are treated and supported.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the takeaway? What can we learn from the Dr. No case, both the successes and the frustrations?
That's a great question. And I think there are several layers to the answer. On a practical level, it underscores the importance of continued advancements in forensic science, the need for better communication and cooperation between law enforcement agencies across jurisdictions, and a more empathetic and comprehensive approach to supporting victims and their families.
Those are all critical points. But beyond the practical implications, what about the more philosophical ones? What does this case tell us about the nature of justice and memory?
I think it challenges us to reconsider what justice truly means when a perpetrator remains unknown. Is it simply about punishment, or is it something more nuanced, something that encompasses acknowledging the harm, honoring the victims, and striving to create a safer world?
That's a profound question, and I don't think there's an easy answer, but it's a question worth grappling with.
Absolutely. And it's also a reminder of the importance of memory, of keeping the stories of the victims alive, of ensuring they aren't forgotten, even as the years pass and the headlines fade.
That's a powerful message to end on. And for our listeners who want to delve deeper, we encourage you to explore the individual stories of the victims, to learn their names, to understand their lives beyond the context of this case. You can also research the history of serial killer investigations, the evolution of forensic science, and the impact of unsolved crimes on communities.
Knowledge is power. And the more we understand about these complex issues, the better equipped we are to address them, to advocate for change, and to create a more just and compassionate world.
Well said. Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly thought-provoking deep dive into the Dr. No case. It's been a fascinating and unsettling journey.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, listeners, while the mystery of Dr. No may never be fully solved, the pursuit of justice and the preservation of memory are ongoing endeavors.